Resourceful Designer, Episode 16, 20 Questions Your Design Clients Should Be Asking You.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer Podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host, he was once a Quark Express certified expert, Mark DeCote.
Welcome to Resourceful Designer. I'm always so happy to have you join me, whether you're listening at work, in the car, have your earbuds in while you're out doing a workout or walking the dogs or doing the groceries or whatever. Maybe you're wrapping Christmas gifts. It's that time of the year after all. Now I'm putting this episode out just a little bit later than I had intended, but I have a really good excuse. I actually took the day off on Wednesday and my son and I drove to Ottawa, which is about an hour's drive from here, to go see the new Star Wars movie in IMAX 3D. Now we could have seen it at our local cinema here, but it's not the same as seeing it in IMAX, and wow, what an experience. If you are a Star Wars fan, even if you're not a Star Wars fan, but you just enjoyed maybe the Star Wars movies, you definitely have to get out and see this one. Now, I can go on and on about it, but this isn't a Star Wars podcast. This is a graphic design related podcast. So you'll just have to tune in elsewhere for your Star Wars fix. Now, I just want to thank everybody who's followed me on Twitter. This last week, I gained a lot of new Twitter followers. And if you're not one of them, you can find me at ResourcefulD on Twitter. Or just go to twitter.com/resourcefulD. They couldn't let me put the full designer in there. It was too long for a Twitter name, so it's just resourcefulD. And if you happen to be on Facebook, why don't you click on over to facebook.com/resourcefuldesigner and like the page over there. But if there's one thing you can do for me this week, that would be to share this podcast with a friend. Maybe you're going to be meeting up with some people over the holidays. You might know some other designers, some little get-togethers. Throw in a good word for the podcast. Tell them that you've been listening to Resourceful Designer and that they can get it on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. That would be a really good Christmas present that you can give me as well as your fellow designers. Now, in last week's podcast, I talked about questions you should be asking your design clients. But this week, I'm going to flip the tables around and I'm going to cover 20 questions that your design clients should be asking you. But before I get into that, I want to share this week's design resource, or should I say resources, because I usually use both of these in conjunction. And that's two resources that I use, and hopefully you already know about these. But if not, these are great resources for discovering fonts or identifying fonts. Sometimes a client will come to you and they say, here, can you do something? Or I really like this font. And you have no idea what font that is. Well, whenever I get in a situation like that, the first two places I go to are What the Font, which is part of myfonts.com. And what the font allows you to do is to scan in or take a screenshot of an image of that particular font. You upload it, and then you identify the various letters or characters, and then it'll give you its best guess on what that actual font is. And if you have enough characters, it does a pretty good job. It's not always 100% accurate. Sometimes there has been a few cases when you get some funky fonts that it's just way out there and not even close, but I have to say, over the years, I have identified quite a few fonts using that. Now, as I mentioned, it is part of myfonts.com, but if you put in whatthefont.com, it'll redirect you there. Now, sometimes you can't always get an image or for whatever reason. So the other site that I'll usually check on is identifont.com. And there you can search, if you happen to know part of the name of the font, like maybe it's some obscure font, you happen to remember that it's something star. Well, you type in the word star and it'll give you a list of all sorts of fonts that have the word star in them. And if you don't know the name, you can also search for fonts similar to something. So maybe you can, if you know a font that's similar, like say something simple, Times New Roman, you can say, I want to find a font that's similar to Times New Roman, but isn't Times New Roman. It'll give you a list of fonts that are similar. Now, sometimes you can get some more obscure fonts or different looking faces. And if you say something similar to this, it'll give you a good chance to find it. Because of course, Times New Roman, I mean, how many different fonts are out there that you could say are similar? The list would probably be endless there. But in some cases, it does come in very easy. Now, you can also search by picture or design if they're icons or some sort of pictograph. You can also search by designer or publisher if you know that. Or what I normally do is search by appearance. And when you're searching by appearance, what it does is it asks you a bunch of questions, such as, is it a serif font or a sans serif font? It'll show you some examples, like what does the lowercase g look like? Does it have one of the little rounded ball bases, or is it just a little hook? Does the lowercase I have a dot on it, or sometimes does it have a square on it, or does it have nothing on it? So it asks you a whole bunch of questions about the font, narrowing down the possibilities. And sometimes it'll take a guess after 10 questions, 15 questions, 20 questions, depending on how you're answering. And if you happen to have a few characters from the font that you're able to get some good answers, there's a good chance that you can actually identify the font that you're looking for. And I've been very successful with that resource. I am not associated with these at all. I don't get any kickback or anything for mentioning them. These are just two resources that I have been using for years to help me whenever I have a font and I just don't know what it is. Once again, those two are What the Font, which is part of myfonts.com, and Identifont at identifont.com. Now, last week, as I mentioned, I talked about various questions you should be asking your design client when they come to you with a project. But this week, I'm going to cover questions that your design client should be asking you. And if they don't ask you these questions, maybe you should be volunteering the answers anyways. Now, to design clients, choosing a graphic designer can seem like a very scary task. I mean, sometimes they'll approach you with a clear vision of what they want, hoping that you can possibly deliver exactly what they have in mind. But other times, they're contacting you because they don't have a clue of what they want, and they want your creativity to come up with something. Now, regardless of why they're reaching out to you, they have two things they're looking for. One, do you have the skills to complete the project they're looking to hire you for? And two, are you somebody they can trust with the reputation of their company? And that second one is a big one. Now, the only way that they can gain that trust is by getting to know you. And to do that, they ask questions. And if you're not prepared to answer those questions, it can mean the difference between getting the job or getting a "don't call us, we'll call you" answer at the end of your conversation. So here are some of the questions that you can expect. Number 1, can you tell me a bit about yourself? This is probably the first question that they'll ask you. And it sounds like a pretty simple question, but they don't want to know personal stuff about you, like the fact that I have 2 dogs and a cat and that I'm married and have a couple of kids. No, they want to know about you professionally, your business, and that sort of stuff. So this is your chance to sell yourself, but try to do it without bragging. Like, don't immediately go into all sorts of awards you've won or amazing things you've done. But if you have done some work for some big name companies or from some well-known people, this is the perfect time to mention them. And just do it in passing. It's like, yeah, I've done work for such and this person and that company, and just keep it brief. And at any time, if your client looks lost, or if you start going on and they start look like they don't know what you're talking about, wrap it up. They're asking that question because they want to get a feel for you. So the last thing you want to do is scare them away with too much of an answer. Now, question number 2 is, how long have you been in business? Now, on the front of it, this one seems pretty easy to answer. In my case, I've been in business for 10 years, but I've been a graphic designer for 25 years. So anytime I'm asked this question, I make sure to let them know, yes, I've run my business for 10 years now, or actually it'll be 10 years in February. But before that, I worked for 15 years in a print shop, working my way up until I was running the graphic design department. Now, if you're fairly new to the industry, I'll tell you a little secret. When I was in school, one of my professors told us that when we graduate, a lot of places are looking, when you are putting out your resume, they say experience. Well, you can say, like in my case, I had a 3-year program. When I graduated, my professor said that I've been a graphic designer for 3 years. Because you're not a graphic designer upon graduation. You're a graphic designer the minute you enroll in the program, because that's when you start learning, you start gaining experience, and so forth. Even though you might not have worked on any client stuff, you've never done a customer project or anything like that, the stuff you did in school does count towards your experience. So why not put it down on your resume, or if somebody asks you? So if you graduated a year or 2 ago, don't be afraid to say, I have 5 years experience as a graphic designer, if your course was 3 years long. Now, in my case, I don't really say that anymore because I graduated 25 years ago. Whether I say I've been in the business 25 years or 28 years, it doesn't really make much difference at this point. But when you're still young and fresh, it could mean the difference between getting the job and not getting the job. Now, question number 3 is, do you have an office or are you home-based? Now, I get this one because I have a mailbox at a UPS store. And that's a store that offers copy services and shipping services and all that. But they also have mailboxes in there that I rent on a yearly basis. And I do this because I don't really want people associated with my home. I live outside of town, and it's a lot easier for me to have a mailbox there. So if somebody needs to drop something off, they can go into the store, drop it off with one of the ladies that works there, and they'll put it in my mailbox for me. It's a lot more convenient than having them drive all the way out to my place, or for me to drive into town to go get something from them. But because the UPS store, they don't have what you call PO boxes, they call them suites. I get asked it a lot because on my business card, it says my mailing address is Suite 338 and then the rest of my address. So they say, because it's a suite, do you have an office in town? And I'll just be honest with them and say, no, I don't. That's my mailbox. I work from home. Never be afraid to mention that you work from home. And if this seems to put your client off, mention to them that you have no problems going to meet with them. And you should always make yourself available to go visit them, whether for a presentation, a meeting, or whatever. Now, question number 4 is how many people work with you? Now, if you're like me and you're a solopreneur and you work by yourself, the best answer that you can give is that you work for yourself, but you have a number of people you could call upon for various tasks depending on the projects you're working on. And you can also mention that because you don't have these people on as employees, that you just call on them as you need them, it's a way for you to keep costs down because you don't have to pay extra people. And you can assure the client that if they need a copywriter or a photographer or whatever they need, that you can take care of that. And don't be afraid if you've never actually worked with one before. I remember the very first time I had a client ask me if I knew a copywriter. I said, yes, I do, and that I can take care of it. But I didn't know a copywriter. And once I got the job, I went hunting and I found a copywriter for it. And everything worked out great. And the best thing about it was the next time something came up and I needed a copywriter, now I had one that I had already worked with before. And that's how you build relationships in this business. When I first started off, it was slow going, building up these list of people that I can call upon. But now, after 10 years, I have a long list of people that, depending on what task I need, I have my go-to people and I have some other people that I only use once every while, but I keep a list of them so that if any client asks, yes, I do have them. And if it's somebody that I've never dealt with before or something I've never had a need of before, I never tell the client no. I just say, yes, I'll handle that, and then I'll find somebody to do it. Now, question number 5 that I sometimes get asked is, what is your specialty? Now, in my case, I don't necessarily have a specialty. If you do, you can mention it. If you're an illustrator and that's what you do, you can say, I specialize in illustration. But I'm not an illustrator, so I can't say that. But I will tell you one thing I do say is if they're contacting me for a website, the one thing I will tell them is I am a graphic designer. I'm not a computer programmer. So when I build a website, I'm building it for the looks and for the feel and the usability. And that I might not be doing the prettiest code. You could hire somebody else that'll do much nicer code than I will. But when the project is said and done, it's not the code that the visitors to the website will be looking at. It's the website itself. And I can tell you that I've won a lot of website designs over the years by using that pitch and just telling the client that, yeah, you can go to other companies around, but just double check, make sure that they are designers, because a lot of computer programmers were getting into web design and they might be able to code circles around somebody like me. But in the long run, you want a website that looks good and that people will be impressed with. And that's where I come in. Now, question number 6 is, have you ever worked on this kind of project before? And here again, be honest. If you haven't, say so. Now, maybe you can say, I've never worked on this sort of project before, but I've worked on something similar, and you can mention it. But if you haven't worked on anything similar, tell your client that you've never had the opportunity before, but it's something you've always wanted to do, or it's something you really think would be fun and you'd like to try. It'd be challenging and you would love the opportunity to work on it. So never be afraid to give them an honest answer and say, no, I've never done this before. But if you show your enthusiasm, oftentimes that'll be enough for them. Now, question number 7, how much do you charge? And if you charge an hourly rate and that's how you work, great. Just tell them this is my hourly rate. Now, if you do charge project-based pricing or value-based pricing, and if you want to know more about those, check out episode 11 of the Resourceful Designer podcast. But if you charge those ways, maybe you should tell the client that you want to discuss more about the project before you can give a price because you need to know more of the scope of the work. And I'll tell you another little secret on how I won a lot of website designs over the years is I would tell my clients that I do not charge websites by the page. Now, if you do charge by the page, then you can't use this method. But what I would tell my client is that a lot of places do charge by the page, and they'll charge you X amount of dollar for a home page and then X amount of dollar for each page after that. And I would tell them that most of the design costs go into the home page. Once the home page is built, or even sometimes a secondary page, once that secondary page is built, then creating new pages is not that hard. You're just changing the content and building some links. But there are some places, now I haven't looked into this in a while, but I remember in my local area, there was places that were charging websites a couple of $100s for the homepage and then say $100 per page after that. And I would tell them that's ridiculous, because all you're doing sometimes, especially if the client is providing the content, sometimes it's just a matter of copying and pasting onto a new page, and there they just charged you $100. So a lot of times I would tell my clients that going my way would end up being a lot less expensive in the long run. Now, that was back when I was charging by the hour. Now I charge by the project, which is a little different. But if you are somebody starting out and you're charging by the hour, that might be something to consider when pricing a website, is mention to your client that you do not charge by the page, how some places do. And the clients sometimes will be impressed just with the fact that you bring that up. Now, following up that question number 8 is, can you give me a ballpark figure? And this is one, of course, just about every client will ask. I mean, if you tell them that you work by the hour, they'll ask you, well, how many hours do you think this will take? If you say you work by the project base, then they'll say, well, how much do you think this project will be? And a lot of times they want to know this before they sit down and go over the whole thing with you. Now, my best advice is be as broad as you can, and make sure you tell them that you can be more precise once you know the full scope of the work. I had somebody reach out to me earlier this week and ask me about a logo design and says, how much do you charge for a logo? I said, I've done logos for as little as a couple of $100s all the way up to thousands of dollars. And it all depends on the research involved, what the logo is for. There's so many things involved, but that's the ballpark I gave him. I said it could be anywhere. I mean, he wasn't giving me any information up front, but he asked me, he said, I'd love for you to redo my logo. Can you give me a ballpark figure? And I told him, until we talk more, I says, my ballpark is anywhere from, as I said, a couple of $100s to a couple of $1,000 maybe. Now, question number 9 that clients will ask you is, how long will the job take? Now, this one is tough, especially because you don't always know how the clients are going to react. You might think, well, it'll take me a week to do this job. It's a simple job. But if you send a proof off and it takes 4, 5, 6, sometimes a week or two before the client gets back to you, well, now all of a sudden that project that should take a week is now taking 3 weeks. Now, I know that's not your fault, but sometimes the clients don't realize that, and they expect something even though it falls upon them. Now, in my experience, whenever a client asks how long a job will take, I always estimate longer than what I think it actually will be. And another trick I use is whenever they hire me to do a job, unless it's something and they tell me it's really pressing, that they need something by a fixed date, I'll often tell them that, yeah, I'd love to take this project, but I can't start it until next week, or it'll be 2 weeks before I start this project. I especially do this on websites because I work on my own. I don't like working on a lot of websites at once. I usually work 2, sometimes 3 websites at a time, depending on what stages they're at. And I'll let a client know I've got 2 websites on the go. And as soon as I'm finished one, which should take maybe 2 weeks to finish it off, then I'll be able to start your project. Now, the best thing about doing this is if you do manage to start sooner, it makes you look really good in your client's eyes. And if it's not using that tactic that I'll start it in a couple of weeks. Now, in a case, say, like they want you to design a brochure or a flyer for them. Well, you might say, well, I can have that done to them within a week, but you tell them it'll take 2 weeks to get it. And the client, if they say fine, then if you manage to do it in the week that you thought, it'll really make you look good. But if something comes up and you can't do it in that week, you do have that extra week added on. Now, let me tell you, when I worked at the print shop, one of the things that it used to drive me nuts is when management, who's not in design, the people that worked in the front offices would often deal with the clients. Anytime a client would come up with the question, how long will this take? Management automatically thought the client was asking them, how fast can I get this? And I was constantly telling management that is not the same question. When a client says, how long will this take? There's no problem telling him it'll take 2 weeks. If the client has an issue with that, they will let you know. If they say, oh, well, I really need this by next week, then you can talk to them and negotiate or do whatever about it. But if a client asks you, how long will this take? Don't come out and say, oh, I can get this done in 2 days, or I can have something to you for tomorrow, if they don't really need it. Because one of the worst things is if the client asks you, how long will a job take? And you say, well, I can have a proof by the end of the day tomorrow. And then they turn around and say, oh, I was hoping you'd say next week or within 2 weeks. Well, now you've just committed to having something by the end of the day tomorrow, where you could have taken a week or two to work on this project and really do something nice. So you're always best to put a little padding in your time frame there. And if it doesn't work out for the client, they will let you know. Now, question number 10, which hopefully your client will ask, and if not, this is something that you should answer regardless, is what do you need from me? And remember, this is your client asking you, what do you need from me? And this is your opportunity to tell your client that you need, maybe if it's a new client with an established brand, you need vector files of their logo. You need their photos if they have specific photos they're using. You need their color numbers, their Pantone numbers. That's a big one. I mean, some clients know it right off the bat, and then some clients, they don't have a clue what you're talking about whenever you say you need their Pantone numbers. And they have to go hunting for it. So if the client doesn't ask you this question, this is one that you should volunteer and answer for anyways, and let them know that you need, and then itemize everything you need from them. And this could include getting back to you quickly after a proof, especially if there's a time frame involved. If you let them know, I'm going to be sending you a proof, say on Thursday, but I need an answer back by noon on Friday, that gives them something to go by. If you just say, I'm going to send you a proof on Thursday, who knows? It might be the following Tuesday before they get back to you. So when they say, what do you need from me? You need a prompt reply. You need the Pantone colors. You need whatever. You need access to their domain name or their web hosting or whatever. So that's a very important question and not always asked by your clients. And if that's the case, you should volunteer an answer or approach the subject with them. Now, another question that I get asked sometimes, and this kind of has to do with the question I asked earlier with how many people you work with, and if I say that I have people I can go to. Question number 11 is, who will work on my project? And again, be honest. In most cases, in my situation, I'll say I am, but sometimes I had a client come to me and they wanted me to do something, and it was almost all illustration. And as I've mentioned before, I'm not an illustrator. So I had some illustrators I went to, and I hired one to do some drawings. So most of the project was in the illustrator's hands. All I did was I just put the illustration and put a line of text underneath it, and that was it. So when he asked who will be working on my project, I volunteered the name of the illustrator, but I told the client that all dealings still remain through me. The illustrator would be sending the stuff to me, and I would pass them on to the client, and any feedback would come to me, and I would pass it on to the illustrator. But I didn't hide who the illustrator was from the client. And a lot of times that question is just to kind of put the client at ease. Now, question number 12, an important one, is what is included in my completed project? And this is something that you get done right up front. It should be in your contract, and you should definitely be using contracts. And this is where you say stuff like, at the end of your project, you'll be given a PDF file of the job, or you will have a fully functional website. And this is where you negotiate stuff like, maybe for the flyer, maybe the client will say, I'd like to get the layered Photoshop files. And this is where you negotiate on whether or not you want to do that. They might ask, do they have exclusive rights? Who owns the designs? In some cases, depending on the contract or depending on the work, when I design something, there's some cases where I own the design. I can't use the design for anything else, but they can't take that design to another designer to have them tweak it. If they need anything done, they have to come back to me because I own the design. I give them the exclusive rights to use it, but I own the design. And in other cases, the contract, the way it's written out, is I don't own anything at the end. The client owns it all. So this is all stuff to negotiate at this point when the client asks, what's included in my completed project? Now, question number 14 is, what if I'm not happy with the design? Now, this is a tough one. Sometimes you'll get clients that no matter what you do, you just can't please them. So once again, in your contract, make sure you have something that states the terms should one or both of you decide to walk away from the project. Now, this is not something I would dwell on too much. It's just in passing when you're going over the contract, I would just mention, should something come up, here are the terms. And in most cases, it would be something like, say you told the client you'd give him 3 designs and you give him 3 designs and he hates them all. Well, at that point, you can go back to the drawing board and maybe come up with 3 more designs. In your contract, if they ask for 3 designs, you would have in the contract say, if the first 3 designs are not then there would be an additional price to do some other designs, and then the contract would continue from there. Or if the client just says, no, I don't like your style and all that, I'm going to go somewhere else, at that point, you would have something in your contract to say, if at this point we decide to part ways, then X amount of dollars will be owed to the designer. And you would have that in your contract. So it is a tough one because who knows, maybe somebody will hire you one day and they really won't like your stuff. It doesn't happen very often, but just last year I had this where I went back and forth in every design. Now, this was a case where the client had no idea what they wanted, and they gave me very, very broad instructions, and they gave me a lot of leeway. And I gave them 3 designs, which is what they asked for, and they were completely different ideas, and they didn't like any of them. And they asked me again for 3 more designs. And I came up with 3 more designs. And then they actually had one of them. They said, this one's okay. Why don't we try different variations of that one? So I took that one design and I broke it up and I gave them 3 other designs based on that first variation. And the farther we got, then finally the client just says, you know what? None of these work for me. And they decided to end the contract there. And they paid me what was in the contract. At that point, we had already gone through our first 3, and then we had gone to another 3, and we'd actually gone to a third 3 designs, and they paid me for my work up to that point. And I've never checked back. I don't know what they ended up doing, but they never proceeded with any of my designs. So make sure you have that in your contract, what to do if they're not happy with your design. Now, also have it in your contract, what happens if you are not happy with your client. Just word it in your contract that either one of you can walk away, because there might be a time where, for one reason or another, you just want to wipe your hands of a client and walk away, and you should have it in your contract, some sort of escape clause that will allow you to do that. Now, question number 15, what services do you offer after a project is done? Now, this one applies mostly to websites. Like, they might want to know, do you provide any maintenance for the website? Do you do any SEO services? Do you do updates? If it's a WordPress site, do you update the plugins for them? Do you update the WordPress site? What sort of stuff do you do? Now, again, this could be in your contract as you're doing it, or you could do this as a separate contract. I usually do this as a separate contract. I have one contract for designing and right up to the launch of the website. As soon as a website is launched, that contract is considered finished. And then I have them sign a separate contract for anything done afterwards, such as maintenance or whatever the case may be. Now, in other cases, maybe a client hires you to design a logo and they want to know what services you offer after that. Like, do you do business cards? Do you do trade show displays? Do you do vehicle wraps? Whatever the case, they might ask you what other stuff you do. So, very popular question. What services do you offer after the project is done? And this is another question that you should also sometimes volunteer if they don't ask. If a client comes to you to design a logo and that's all they ask you for, make sure you let them know that you can do all this other stuff as well, because they might not know. I talked about that way back in episode 2, titled, Do Your Clients Know What You Do? Because it always amazed me over the years when clients that I've been working with for years and years and years all of a sudden ask me if I know anybody to do something else. And it's like, yeah, I do that. And they said, really? I didn't know you do that. I've had web clients that I've designed multiple websites for that didn't know I also designed for print, and vice versa. Print clients that didn't know I do web stuff. Services you offer after the project is done. That's question number 15. Now, question number 16, do you have any references? When they ask, make sure you have somebody to turn them to. It's always good to have this talk with your clients beforehand, like other clients I'm talking about that you've done work for, and ask them if you can use them as a reference in the future. If you've got some really good clients that you do regular work for, ask their permission to use them as a reference. And then if somebody ever asks, then you can just right there on the spot say, yes, you can contact this person, or this person. And that should be an easy one for you to help you win the project. Now, 17, I get asked this one mostly from my web design stuff, is what happens if you go out of business? Because especially with a web project, they might be wondering like for updates or maintenance or what happens a year or two down the road. What happens if I decide to close my business? And I have something, it's a little clause in my contract that states that if I go out of business, all files and all access reverts over to them and that they don't lose anything. And in the case I go out of business, I will be contacting them and giving them all the information they need. So if they do ask you this, make sure you give them peace of mind. Now, question number 18, can you send me samples? And that's basically your portfolio. If they're asking you for logos, send them sample of logos. If you have a portfolio, sometimes it's nice though, if you have a website with a portfolio on it with different things, send them some other stuff. If they're asking you for, say, a logo design, and you might have 1 or 2 or 3 logos on your website amongst all the other stuff you do, send them additional logos. Don't send them the same ones that are on your website because they've probably already seen them, but send them additional stuff, especially if it's in line with the project they're asking you to do. And question number 19 is when they ask, can I see a sample of your idea for my job before I sign the contract? Your answer should be a definitive no. I've only had this asked of me a couple of times where a client says, I'm not sure if you're the right person. Can you give me an idea? Can you just give me something, even a rough draft of what you were thinking before I sign the contract? And no, they've seen your portfolio. They've asked to see samples. They should know at that point if you're good enough for the project. Do not do any work for free because that's what they're asking you to do. They're asking you to submit a design, no matter how rough it is, and then they'll decide whether or not they should hire you. You can let them know that if they want to back out after the first set of proofs, you've written it in the contract, we've already discussed that, but there will be a fee involved. So never, ever give any designs, no matter how rough. I don't care if it's a sketch on a napkin. You never give anything to them before they sign the contract. And finally, question number 20 that your design clients may ask you is, why should I hire you? And this one, to be honest, it's all on you. You've gone through all the other questions. This is usually one of the last questions. And even if it's the first questions, it's fully up to you how you answer it. The only advice I can give you is be honest. Never pretend to be something you're not. Explain your skills, your qualifications, why this client would be crazy not to hire you, and why you would love to work with them. This is the make or break question, and I wish I had a definitive answer to give you for it, but I don't. So those are 20 questions that you might expect a client to ask you when they're interviewing you for a possible project. I'll just go over them once again real quick. Number 1, will you tell me a bit about yourself? Number 2, how long have you been in business? Number 3, do you have an office or are you home-based? Number 4, how many people work with you? Number 5, what is your specialty? Number 6, have you worked on this kind of project before? 7, how much do you charge? 8, can you give me a ballpark figure? 9, how long will this job take? 10, what do you need from me? 11, who will work on this project? 12, what's included in my completed project? 13, what if I'm not happy with the design? 14, what services do you offer after a project is done? 15, do you have any references? 16, what happens if you go out of business? 17, can you send me samples? 18, can I see samples of your idea for my job before I sign the contract? And 19, why should I hire you? And yes, if you can tell by my numbering scheme, I messed up. Somehow I skipped 13 whenever I listed all my questions here. So I said 20 questions, but in fact, I only have 19. And that's what happens when you don't have your work proofread. Well, anyways, if you want to comment on any of these questions, you can visit the show note page at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 16 and leave a comment right there on the page. Or you can send me an email at feedback@resourcefuldesigner.com. Now, normally at this time, I would tell you what my next episode will be about. But because I'm taking next week off, it's between Christmas and New Year, and I won't be back until January, I honestly haven't thought about what the next episode will be about. Well, I'm looking forward to taking next week off, spending some time with the family. My son is home from university, so doing some stuff with him. And whether or not you celebrate the holidays or not, I wish you all the best at this time of year and a solid end to 2015, and I wish you a happy new year and a prosperous 2016. I look forward to being back in January, continuing this podcast with you. But until then, I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best this festive season, and as always, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer Podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.